Hi, Joan, are you there?
I'm here. Hi, Conn.
Good to be talking to you. How's the weather out there in Washington today?
It's raining today.
Again?
Again. It is still April. And soon to be May, and it'll rain in May. And June, it'll rain in June. But I still have mountains, and it's a beautiful place to live.
So are you actually in Seattle, or where in Washington are you?
I am in Seattle.
Okay. Beautiful city up there.
Beautiful Seattle and beautiful Ballard, Seattle. It's a funky little old-time neighborhood here in the city.
So how does a beautiful Seattle woman like yourself get started on Daily Coast? Daily Coast?
She gets goaded into it by her brother-in-law.
Blaming family, huh?
It's always family's fault. My
So,
brother-in-law was an avid reader of all of the blogs, and he kept saying, you know as much as any of these guys that are writing out there. You should go in there and knock some heads. You should go tell them. So he finally talked me into it, and once I started blogging, I was hooked. There was no hope for me then.
what year are we talking about?
This was early in 2004.
Okay, so still relatively recently then.
Still relatively recently. I was very fed up with politics after 2000, after the election of 2000. I was frustrated, like a lot of people, particularly in the run-up to the Iraq War, and looking for an outlet. And I think probably my brother-in-law was tired of hearing me yell at him about it, so he thought he could focus my energies somewhere perhaps more productive.
So was he just a Daily Coast reader, or did he also post a diary there as well?
He commented there infrequently, was mostly a lurker.
Gotcha.
And
I was always a lurker myself until I got my current gig here.
Yeah. I started out lurking. It was an intimidating place. I signed up in February of 2004 and didn't really start writing for probably 6 weeks before I decided to venture in with a comment.
So then how did you separate yourself and end up becoming, what exactly is your title at Daily Coast?
I am a fellow
Right.
of Daily Coast Media, but I'm also a contributing editor.
Okay.
The front pagers are all considered contributing editors.
Right, and now that Marcos is on paternity leave, you're pretty much administrating the site, right?
Everybody picks up, but since I am now a fellow and I'm being paid to do it, I'm taking on the bulk of the responsibility for posting during the week, on weekdays.
Gotcha. So, again, how does that process go from just a regular diarist, circa 2004, to becoming a fellow, to becoming a contributing editor and administrating the site when Marcos has other things to do?
Mm-hmm. It's very community-driven. One of the things that I like best about Daily Coast is that it's very democratic, small d, and if you are a valuable contributor, that's recognized. I commented a lot in that first year and in 2005. Started writing diaries probably in the summer of 2004, I think. Before that, just commented. Interacted with enough people, made enough friends, made enough sense politically.
So made enough friends in the Daily Coast community?
In the Daily Coast community.
Okay.
We call each other friends. We are friends. We found that out when we met for the first time in person at the convention last year. The relationships that you build online are very real, and we are all pretty good friends, and some enemies too. That has to happen. But it is a very democratic process, very community driven.
So what does that mean exactly? Are there elections? What do you say community driven? How does Marcos select the fellows, or are there votes?
We're not voted on, except in the sense that comments can be recommended.
Right.
And diaries can be recommended. The people who write well, who have good political analysis, who have good skills in communicating, generally are recognized. Their comments are rated up, their diaries are recommended, and they tend to get the most attention. Throughout the year, certainly the contributing editors take note of who in the community seems to be rising up. Marcos takes note of that, notices who it is, and on an annual basis, usually in early to mid-December, Marcos will put up a nominating thread for the people he wants the community to be involved in picking the new front pagers. So he puts up a nominating thread. The community all participates, says who they want. Marcos looks through the list. He generally has in mind a handful of people.
Already some favorites on his part.
Mm-hmm. But he wants to make sure that they're supported by the community, too. And often there are folks in the community that are overlooked by contributing editors, and Marcos will go back and read their diaries, read their comments, ask for advice from the other stable of contributing editors. But it's his decision who gets to be on the front page. And this is the first year that we've had the fellow program.
Right. Do you want to talk about that a little? I know with the Blog Roll Amnesty Day, Marcos was taking some heat about not promoting bloggers enough, and I know there was that Nation article by Becca Watson about bloggers not getting paid, and Marcos was saying, look, yeah, maybe some smaller mid-level bloggers are taking a hit on revenue from not getting links from Daily Kos, but I have the Fellows program. I'm paying people to blog. I'm part of the solution. So, if you want to talk about what that Fellows program is and how it got started.
The Fellows program is a result of Marcos's tremendous success as a blog master. Ad sales, primarily. He was able to afford to pay 4 of us full-time positions. 3 of us quit our jobs, our full-time jobs with benefits.
And this was in 2006, because now don't you guys have 12 fellows?
No. There are just 4.
Okay.
And in fact, the program started at the beginning of 2007.
Okay.
So
this is the first operating year of the Fellows program.
Yes.
Okay.
It's important because it's elevating blogging to a professional level, which I think is critical. It's difficult that it has to be driven by ad revenues. Right now we're having a bit of a stir on the pages because he's taking Google ads, and one of the random Google ads that shows up is one for John McCain.
Yeah, Tom Bevan at RCP Blog noticed that the other day. It's a great screen capture, one for the ages.
It is. And because of that, I don't know whether he'll decide to continue with Google ads. He's experimenting right now, but the revenue from them is very good and allows him to do things like hire on an additional fellow, which he's hoping to be able to.
I remember the big furor when he was accepting Chevron ads, and people were upset with that.
And people still complain about it. Atrios, I know, gets complaints too because he also has the Chevron ad. I think there's something sort of fun and subversive, actually, in taking money from Chevron to do the work that we do. So
I would think so. I think it'd be quite interesting, although. I always think of the area I know, right there in Richmond, George Mills District, they have all those Chevron processing plants, which isn't too far from Marcos's house. So. Not
too far, no.
So in your role as administrator, especially when Marcos is gone, what's kind of your biggest headache? And what's kind of your average day like?
Probably the thing that's most frustrating to me personally is not being able to follow through on a lot of the long-term projects that I would like to do in writing because there's a need for immediacy.
Do you have like a quota of posts per day, or how does that break down?
It sort of depends on who's around and who's able to fill in.
Okay.
I like to hit 8 to 10 posts a day when Marcos isn't writing, to make sure that the page stays refreshed if there's something new up. That can be kind of challenging. I generally have 3 or 4 sort of generic posts on things that aren't particularly timely that I've got at least in my head, if not fully written, so that I have something to draw upon if there isn't breaking news.
Do you ever feel like you're stressing? You're reaching for stuff when you're trying to reach that 8 to 10 posts a day?
No, oddly enough, there's always something to write. It might not be very exciting stuff. It may be another Idaho post.
So it's a big enough world that there's always something to fill, huh?
There's always something happening. There are 50 states, even in a non-election year and an off year, there's plenty to write about. It doesn't feel like a non-election year. It feels like we're in the heart of the 2000.
Well, here at the Hotline, we managed to fill 60 pages a day on off years. So we know there's plenty of stuff out there.
Yes.
What about moderating the comments? Is that ever a problem for you, for the site or for administrators?
It can be a frustration, yeah. sometimes you feel a little bit like an elementary school teacher needing to go in and wrap some knuckles. It's generally a self-moderating community. Usually the folks do a really good job of taking care of keeping off the trolls. We have a rating system that allows what we call trusted users, people who have built up enough mojo through recommends on their comments, and who've been there long enough to be trusted. And they very much help moderate the community, get rid of the trolls.
What is the process for that? If one of these trusted people negatively rates a commenter, what's the process then for disallowing that person's account? Does that all eventually go through Marcos with someone like you, or is there an automated process, or what is it?
There's an automated process for some of it, and actually a lot of the run-of-the-mill hit-and-run kind of trolls do get picked up in autoban. We call it autoban, like Autobahn. They get enough zeros or enough troll ratings from enough trusted users.
And we go back up just for a second, because I know I've been admonished in the past for vocabulary.
Right.
What exactly is a troll?
A troll is somebody who comes onto the site purely to disrupt. And it's a fine line sometimes trying to figure out if somebody's just argumentative, if they're having a bad day, or if they're truly a troll, if they are there just to create chaos on the site. And the folks who fall into that last category are usually pretty clear-cut. Because
like you said, you first came to the site because you needed an outlet. And so, these trolls obviously are looking for some type of outlet as well. And so what is the line between bad troll and good person looking for an outlet?
It usually makes itself pretty clear. It's usually, I don't want to denigrate other sites, but very little green footballs or Free Republic kind of comments about how horrible liberals are. It usually falls into that category, or saying scurrilous things about various candidates, beyond scurrilous, not blasphemous, but libelous things about candidates.
But it seems a lot of the cattiest, if you will, discussions between commenters is about the candidates. Even people who are committed Democrats, who are, whether they're Obama favorites or Edwards fans, it seems the most heated comment rooms are going to be about the candidates. They
are about the candidates, and that's where we often have a tough line to draw, and that's where the community moderation probably works best. A lot is tolerated in defending your own candidate, but once you bring in obscenities, once you start in on ad hominem attacks against either a poster or a candidate, those are troll-worthy and usually end up being troll-rated and often hidden comments. The community decides whether a comment should be seen by the general public, by anybody who might be reading the blog, or should be hidden. And that's what their zero ratings do, their troll ratings. They hide those comments, and enough of those hidden comments racked up in a period of time will force an auto ban where the system kicks them off.
And I know people can come back from auto bans. I've seen them come back and apologize. What usually is the
well, the only way to come back
process?
From an auto ban is to create a new account.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
And we frown upon that. Some folks seem to manage to slip by. They manage to come back and behave themselves and stick around for a while. And then we're surprised to find out that they had been banned previously. And if you are actually banned by one of the administrators, you have to appeal to Marcos to come back.
Right, and I think I have seen that done successfully a couple of times.
Yeah. Some people make the case that they just had a really bad few days and they'll behave, and they're sort of on probation when they come back. We keep an eye on them. But it often works.
Is there ever a worry that the site, Edwards right now is in the latest, not the post-debate poll, but the pre-Estrella poll, is up around 50%, while you have, Obama around 25, 27, and Hillary so much lower. Is there ever a worry that you have a preponderance of Edwards people that maybe have credibility and are, have the mojo that are more trigger happy on people who are anti-Edwards? than other candidates?
It tends to balance out. The community has done a pretty good job of keeping that balanced in moderating the fights. It's right now the biggest fights are between Obama supporters and Edwards supporters. Clinton isn't garnering a whole lot of passionate defense yet on the blog.
Yeah, I noticed that.
I expect that will happen. Yeah. So right now it's an Edwards-Obama race for the blog. And there are an awful lot of people who think it's just far too early to be doing this and who aren't that involved, who seem to be able to help maintain some balance.
So there's enough neutral observers to...
the neutral observers.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of 08, I don't know if you caught the debate last night, and I think you said you were moderating a panel at Yearly Cost or something?
Yes, at Yearly Coast in August. I'm going to be working with Matt Bai to moderate our presidential forum.
Okay. So not your own personal views, but
right,
I was wondering
because I am uncommitted as of now.
I was wondering if you could help tell our audience what was the Daily Coast reader reaction to the debates last night.
Everybody loved Mike Gravel.
I noticed that this morning as well.
He was. It's always fun to have somebody stir up a little trouble.
What particularly did he say that was most popular?
I think probably his stance on Iraq was the most popular, but he was also entertaining. His post-debate interview with Chris Matthews was just a hoot. It was very fun. He had Matthews laughing. He had all of us laughing.
Yeah, he had me laughing during the debate. He was he was on.
I have to admit that I didn't see the entire debate. I was sort of going back and forth. It's too early for me too. I'm really trying to resist getting sucked into this because it's just too early. But I did catch a few things. I was disappointed in the format of the debate, and I don't know that in 90 minutes with 8 candidates.
Yeah, I really didn't cover that this morning, but there was a lot of disappointment in the community on the comment boards about the format of the debate, and particularly Brian Williams.
There were just, the raise your hands business was pretty goofy.
Like we're in second grade or something here.
Yes, and some of the questions were a little goofy. Some of who he directed questions to, lack of follow-up on good questions. And I know that a huge part of that is because there were 8 people in 90 minutes. And it was just untenable.
Do you feel as though Gravel and Kucinich are, I guess since Daily Coast readers really enjoyed Gravel last night, do you think he's moving the debate in a positive way, or at least from the progressive perspective? I read a number of comments that people were happy that he was really pressuring Obama on Iran and his comments about not taking options off the table. Do you feel it's more of the policy angle of Gravel that was captivating people, or just his overall performance?
I think it was his overall performance. I think people just enjoyed the show. In terms of actually driving policy to the left, being more progressive in terms of policy, and being more credible in terms of policy, I think Chris Dodd did the best job of that, of pulling the debate leftward, of seriously talking about Iraq, where we're at now in Iraq, and sort of flanking the others.
I read a lot of good Dodd comments, but even in the poll about who won the debate, he still only came in at about 1%.
I know.
What's the disconnect there? Richardson definitely underperformed, and there were lots of negative comments on Richardson. But when it came time to vote on who won, Dodd came up short again. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know where that comes from. I think that Chris Dodd just hasn't really been visible enough. And it's very hard to break into that top tier, even on the netroots. I'm not sure where it comes from. I appreciate Dodd's foreign policy stance a great deal.
Right, I know he's been leading on Reed Feingold.
He's leading on Reed Feingold. That's critical.
Why hasn't Edwards paid a price in Daily Coast straw polls, you think, for not glomming onto that? Yesterday in particular, after the Senate vote, he talked strongly about standing firm on a veto, etc. But it seems to me that Daily Coast readers are strongly in favor of Reed Feingold, but they seem to let Edwards skate on the issue.
Well, a handful of us are strongly firm on Reed Feingold, including me as a front pager. The community is mixed on actually setting a funding cutoff. I personally think it's the only way that this war is going to end.
You mean a firm date?
Firm date for when the funding ends, and it's as it is in the entire Democratic Party on the blog. That's been a controversial subject. Personally, I think it's the only way that this war is going to end. I don't think that Bush is going to negotiate anything, and I think the only way to get him out is to dry up the money for it. That's me. I've been pushing Reed Feingold hard, and there's a substantial proportion of the community that's behind that.
But just not enough critical mass to move Edwards's.
Not yet.
Edwards's
I think that we're getting there. I think the acceptance of March 31st, 2008 as at least a goal is going to really coalesce support behind the idea that that is the deadline. And I think that's going to happen in the public, too. There's a perception, I believe, in the public that March 31st, 2008 deadline is an actual deadline rather than a goal, because of the way the House bill is.
Right, which is not in the final legislation. It's just a goal.
Right. But I think it's setting up an expectation in the public.
So going back to Edwards then, if it's not Iraq that he's separating himself on, why is he out there in front of Daily Kos straw polls, do you think?
I think it's the strong economic populism message.
Okay.
That resonated extremely well all through 2006 with Webb, with Tester, with a lot of the netroots candidates that we supported. And I think that's one of the things that's really set Edwards apart. And also on Iraq, he was the first person to come out and say, my vote was a mistake.
Well, Obama's never said that for a reason.
Yeah. He didn't
doesn't have to.
Yes. It's interesting to see Obama on Iraq now. I'd like to see him take a stronger stance, as I would Clinton.
Do you think Obama just hasn't matched Edwards' rhetoric on poverty and inequality issues, or are people waiting for more policy from Obama on it? Is it a rhetoric or policy problem that Obama's falling behind Edwards on income inequality?
I think probably rhetoric right now. I think that he's still sort of feeling his way on how to talk about these issues, from what I've seen. Edwards has had a good 2.5 years to polish this, to work on that presentation, to find out what works, to see how it resonates. And I think on the rhetoric, he's just had more time, more experience, and it's more
What role do you think
natural.
Edwards, shall we say, more active engagement of the netroots plays? I mean, after last night, Edwards was the first one on Daily Kos of the White House aiders with a diary up talking about his Iraq vote. Of course, Elizabeth is very active.
Yes.
There, of course, was the Amanda Marcotte incident. How much of a role does that play, do you think, in his Daily Kos blogging popularity?
I think it plays a fairly large role. He understands how the netroots works. He understands how to talk to us. He understands how to reach out to us, and that garners a lot of goodwill.
Fair enough. Completely switching gears.
All right.
I know a while back there was some discussion on TPM Cafe about kind of more two different blogospheres, kind of the more wonky Talking Points Memo, Washington Monthly blogosphere versus the more activist Daily Kos, MyDD portion of it. And I remember Marcos came down, very, very hard, saying, look, if we don't have, the activist portion of it, then, the wonks are just off talking with themselves and nothing happens. I was wondering if you feel as though, or if you can talk about, do you think there is a strong division between those two blogospheres? And if so, how do you think they interact?
I think we have a lot of cross-pollination among the two sides. I think probably Daily Kos, just by virtue of its size and how many people we have writing on the site in terms of the diaries, I think we probably link more to the TPM cafes, to the policy-driven debates, than they link back to us. Because of where their focus is. The front page of Daily Kos is very activist-oriented, is very what's happening now, how does this affect our electoral prospects. But if you move over to the diaries, you find much more of the wonkish side. For instance, we had a group develop an Energize America plan last year that was presented at Yearly Kos that Governor Richardson, in fact, signed off on. And that was driven by a couple of dozen members of the community, a handful that worked on it actively. And it's a comprehensive energy policy that was driven over months and months in a series of diaries. So that kind of thing is happening. We have one diarist, Nice Eve, NYC Eve, who writes primarily on healthcare and has had a continuing policy discussion with the community on healthcare. So it does happen. It's just not as prominent on the front page. I think they're important drivers, though. I think that it's important to have each represented for the party, for the progressive movement. And I think a lot of what's happening in terms of activism on Daily Kos can help inform policy.
I know at the top of our segment here, you talked about how you were a fellow and you were able to do this full time, and you thought the professionalization of the blogosphere was important. I know, Josh Marshall with Talking Points Memo really feels that he is a journalist, and
he is a journalist. Yeah.
He definitely, he admits he has an agenda, but he definitely feels he's more of a journalist than he is an activist. So how do you kind of see your role differing from Josh Marshall's in a professional sense? He considers himself a professional but a journalist, and you want to be a professional blogger. So how are you different than Marshall in that area?
I think that I am, and most of the Daily Kos writers are much more opinionated than Josh.
I don't know. I think Marshall's pretty opinionated.
He's more so as in the last year or so. His biases showed a lot less in the first couple of years of his blogging, and have really, I think he's gotten fed up with the Iraq War primarily, and then as he's uncovered so much malfeasance in the administration through the prosecutor purge story. The main difference I see right now between what Josh Marshall is doing and what we're doing at Daily Kos is that he really is devoting a lot of resources to primary source reporting.
That is true.
Putting people out in the field. And we're still more in the editorializing.
Well, don't sell yourself short. It's more than editorializing. It's also activism, getting people involved. I mean, when Marshall, needs people to call senators for whether it's Social Security or whether it's sniffing out a secret hold, Daily Kos readers play a role in that, right?
Yes. We are good at driving activists. So that's exciting. It's fun to put up a post calling for aid, calling for calls to senators, and to see it make a difference. We saw that primarily in the Gonzalez nomination. What consistent pressure could do. At the beginning, right after Gonzalez was nominated to be Attorney General, a lot of Democratic senators were coming out saying, this is a great guy, it's going to be an easy confirmation process for him, it's not going to be an issue. And a lot of pressure from the blogosphere changed a lot of senators' minds. And not just pressure from the blogosphere, but I think it helped.
No, definitely. So it seems to me the main difference you would see is Marshall's pouring more of his money into, primary source reporting, whereas...
And investigative.
I'm sorry?
Investigative
reporting. Whereas Kos is funding his fellows, working on technical the technical aspects of the site, etc.
Right. One fellow is working on the technical aspects of the site. The others were working mostly on writing projects. I'm writing for the blog and going to be working on a book to come out next year on democratic politics, believe it or not.
What a surprise.
Yes.
Well, speaking of democratic politics, I was wondering if you could talk for a little bit about how much sway you think the netroots has over the Democratic Party. Or I know you mentioned earlier, a lot of times you're writing and you you know that the Harry Reids, the Nancy Pelosi's, or someone in their office is going to be reading what's up on Daily Kos. To what extent do you think the netroots, the bigger sites like yourself, have a direct megaphone into Harry Reid's office?
I don't want to oversell our influence. I think that's one of the things that's a major problem for the blogosphere now, and is we're so sort of cloistered or so blinded in what we're doing that we think we have more influence than we actually do.
Right.
But we have been able to provide a good foil to the traditional media.
What do you mean by foil?
An opposing view.
Okay.
Speaking for the people. We've seen that particularly the last week with David Broder and his attacks on Harry Reid that have come from a very strange place.
So a counterbalance, really, so that whereas before, Harry Reid might say, "Oh my God, the Washington Post is," or David Broder, the dean of journalism, is saying I'm not doing a good job. Now he has a whole newcomer voices coming in. No, that's complete BS. Broder's off his rocker.
Off his rocker, and more important, these are the Democratic activists out in the field. These are the people out beyond the Beltway. This is the actual activated political community who's paying attention, who's listening, and who can think for themselves and decide. And this is the first time all of us have had that voice in Washington, D.C. And outside the Beltway, big voice. That's where I think we're most important. And I think Harry Reid probably looks a lot at what's written at Daily Kos and thinks we're nuts, we're bonkers. But I think he can get...
And it seems like you're fine with that.
Yeah. That's our role in some ways. One of the things that I think has been interesting for bloggers, particularly on the left side, coming out of the 2006 election, is determining what exactly our role is going to be with the Democrats in the majority. Are we going to be cheerleaders? Are we going to still talk about problems that we see? Are we still going to fight back on legislation that we think is bad, on nominations that we think are bad? I think we're still feeling our way out on that one.
So the jury's still out on that?
The jury's still out on that. I think that you saw that in some of the conflict that we had in the blogosphere over the House version of the supplemental funding bill for Iraq, where some of us were taking a very hard line, saying that these deadlines needed to be more firm, that they needed to be more real. And some who were actually trying to whip the Out of Iraq caucus pretty hard to vote for the thing. It was a natural...
To me, it seemed there was definitely a period of debate and complaining. There were the non-bonding resolutions that came through. There's a lot of kvetching. The bills got initially introduced. People were still very unhappy. Jon Stewart got on Daily Show. Not that he's part of your community, but people, linked to the clip. He said there's the one where he said, Democrats still can't find their ass with a special ass map. With actually the bill that ended up becoming the law of the House, not the law because it got changed by the Senate, but it was the same OB, complicated benchmark bill. But it seemed after there was like a certain tipping point where everyone all of a sudden got on board, and there were definitely some exceptions. Talk Left's Big Ten Democrat, I think yourself actually, were still kind of very skeptical of the bill. But it seemed like, as soon as Bowers and Stoller over at MyDD got on board, and kind of, Meteor Blades over at Daily Kos, as soon as there seemed to be like, okay, this is our bill, this is what we're going to do, then it seemed there was a push for it, and a lot of the criticism died down, and a united front emerged.
It became the showdown with the president, I think is what happened.
Right. It changed from, Beltway versus blogosphere, from, anti-war activists yelling at David Obey in the hall to us versus President Bush. Right. And once that happened, people were able to pretty easily determine what side they wanted to be on.
What side we want to be on. And that Bush veto is critical in this, and how we respond to the Bush veto. This is certainly not decided yet. We've got a lot of blogging to do left on Iraq, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, looks like the veto is going to come, and have to check in the blogometer to see what happens after that.
Yeah.
So outside of Iraq, in what directions do you think the netroots have best moved the Democratic Party? There's definitely, getting behind Murtha early on, supporting Ned Lamont up in Connecticut, definitely pulled the party in a more anti-war direction. But outside of Iraq, what are some other issue areas where the netroots have had an effect on the party?
Iraq has been the primary one. The Ned Lamont race really did allow Democrats to see that Iraq was going to be the primary issue for the election of 2006. Hopefully they realize that it's going to be the primary issue for 2008 as well. I think issues of economic inequality are probably what we're going to be focusing on most next. And I think that getting Jim Webb into the Senate was very helpful in that. Getting John Tester into the Senate was very helpful on that. And who we end up getting behind for 2008. In terms of Daily Kos.
I'm racking my head. I don't think I know of any, outside of the minimum wage, any legislation on the House or Senate side that really addresses that.
I know, and that's what we've got to start working on.
Okay. So there's work left to be done, huh?
Oh, there's a lot of work left to be done. It's hard to get away from Iraq, though, because nothing is going to be able to be done until we're out of Iraq. We're spending billions and billions and billions of dollars every month. And with that money tied up, how are we going to be able to get universal health care? How are we going to be able to reform No Child Left Behind?
Do you ever worry that, let's say a Democratic president gets in the White House, Obama, Edwards, Clinton, whoever, and the Iraq War ends? Do you ever worry that without that unifying issue, that the income inequality worries and how they go about addressing that, that the lack of consensus there will dilute the netroots' power within the party?
It's possible. It's hard to say. We're still a new enough phenomenon that it's hard to know how we'll respond. I think in terms of trying to reshape a progressive agenda, trying to influence the Democratic Party, I'll certainly still be working on that 2 years from now. Marcos will be working on that 2 years from now. Bowers and Stoller, Digby, everybody will still be focusing on that. So it might lessen the interest in the blogosphere from the outside. It might reduce the number of readers that we have. But I think what we've done is grow a fairly large, committed core of outsiders who are sort of becoming professional activists.
And for a long-term benefit, the infrastructure will then be there.
Yes.
The interest from the war, like you said, you may lose readership, some traffic, but there will be an underlying structure that can be used for, whatever future unifying principles might come along.
Yeah, and new voices that get into publishing, new voices that get into printed media, get into television, cable, whatever. I think that we're really going to infiltrate.
Great. Well, I know we talked a little bit about if you had any questions about what the blogometer does, hotline in general. So if you want to finish up this session with those questions.
I actually learned something just now. I always called it blogometer.
Well, actually, when I was interviewing for the job, I called it blogometer, but it turns out I was wrong. It's blogometer, like blogometer. Thermometer, but
blogometer is kind of more fun to say.
I agree.
I'm curious what your criteria are for the blogs that you choose to highlight.
Well, it's pretty much, basically two factors, traffic and the topics of their area that are covered on the blog. So, there are, for example, on the right, it's a lot more of a sticky area because a lot more of them are more, totally global war on terror focused, and there's just not a lot for hotline subscribers to be interested in. So for those who don't know what the hotline, the blogometer is just one section of a larger publication, the hotline, which is a subscription-based. It's a heavy subscription, mostly sold to political professionals, lobbying firms, pollsters, candidates. All the major White House away candidates subscribe to the hotline, and so when I'm writing the blogometer each day, my mindset is always is what I'm taking off the blog, is this of interest to hotline subscribers? And if it's not, then as interesting as it is to me or to someone else, there's only so much room and time I have in the morning. So on the right, you're going to have a lot of sites, like Little Green Footballs, who are going to be telling me about, the situation on the ground in Iraq all the time, and developments in Iran or all throughout the world. And that's all very interesting, but it doesn't really help hotline subscribers a lot. And there's even on Daily Kos and on Instapundit, not so much on MyDD, but definitely on Atrios, you'll have a lot of back and forth. Not back and forth, they're not responding to each other, but lots of posts about news from Iraq. And of course, on the left, it's going to be about everything bad that happens in Iraq. And on the right, it's going to be about everything good that happened in Iraq. And I try to avoid all of that because it's just above my pay grade. And hotline subscribers, the political professionals, the hotline's not going to be their number one source from determining whether or not they feel the Iraq war is going well. They want to know how it's playing in the blogging community and what solutions and strategies bloggers are putting out there to deal with it, and what their message is for that day. So, a story on Daily Kos about how they feel about Harry Reid. Are they supporting Harry Reid? John Kerry was on Daily Kos today saying, I strongly support Harry Reid like I supported Nancy Pelosi. The reaction to the David Roeder article saying, like you said, it was important that Harry Reid knew that the Cossack readers were strong against what Roeder said. So kind of more of those issues, more messaging issues is the kind of material that I'm looking for from blogs. And so from that, it's the blogs I'm going to read are one that those are going to be trafficked, and two, the ones that are going to be focusing on that most often have what is of interest to hotline subscribers. So that's why I pick what I read.
How do you judge quality? Do you have a handful that you sort of are auditioning, that you're keeping track of, to see whether they maintain a level of quality so that you can sort of bring them into your realm?
Well, I mean, it depends what you mean by quality. I mean, I definitely will look at stuff and say, okay, that guy's just wrong. That's completely ridiculous. Go on. But for the most part, if enough people are saying it on highly enough traffic sites, then that's newsworthy to me, and it's going to go in. So I would say, I try to be as open about it as possible. So if you go to the blogometer, the column on the right says the daily read, and that's pretty much what I'm reading every day. Now, there are some other sites that I keep an eye on, but those are mostly local state blogs, and I'm trying to see how often they post, how well they write, do they get the point enough, or are they being, too cutesy too often. I love Fire Dog Leg, very entertaining blog, but sometimes their stuff is, just too sarcastic. Not in I don't like sarcasm saying, but it would just take way too long of a backstory to actually adequately, describe what they're saying. On the other hand, they have tons of, punchy stuff all the time, and so and of course they were all over the Libby trial, so I read them regularly. But a lot of that kind of satire that takes a longer time, I kind of have to go around. Digby's not on my daily read, and I know she's a big part of the community.
Digby should be on everybody's daily read.
Well, my theory is that when she truly has something important to say, you all will let me know about it, and you guys do a good job at doing that. And
that makes sense. It's definitely long form.
That was going to be my next point. Is that I've got a lot of stuff to read in the morning, and as much as I love Digby, that's some dense material. And,
you definitely need to have some time with Digby and Glenn Greenwald.
Right. So I cheat and I let you guys be my editors and pick out the important stuff that they write for me. They're not on my daily read, but I definitely know that they're important. It's just as far as, between 6 and 9 in the morning, I'm reading every single one of those blogs that are on the blog roll there, and some of the longer form entries, the payoff's just not there for me. So it just becomes easier for me to say, oh, Achios has cut 2 paragraphs that he thinks are important out of Digby today.
Right.
Great, he did my job for me. God bless Achios.
Right. I'm often the same way in finding things. The leaky thread, as we call it, our midday open thread, where we have all of our links. Right. Yeah, it's the same for me often. I have half an hour to put that together, and I really want to go see what Greenwald and Digby have written and see if I can sum it up in 2 sentences.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah. But in terms of getting backstory, when you've got the time to sit down with a cup of coffee and just read through the entire post, it's definitely worth it to provide that background.
Yeah, well, a lot of talking points memo stuff on the U.S. Attorney Purge is a lot more, a lot of backstory to a lot of information to go ahead and plow through. But, like you said before, it's a lot of, original-based reporting, and, well, not always, because a lot of times there's linking to mainstream media sources, but they're connecting a lot of dots. And as great as Digby and Greenwald are, Marshall definitely is driving those stories. So I do plow through that because it's just important enough to hotline subscribers that I do so. So I mean that's kind of a good case example of as far as stuff was worth it for me to go through and what's not.
That makes sense. So here's the big question: You're essentially a blogger.
You're
doing this
I
at
have
6 to 9
editors and deadlines, so I don't consider myself a blogger.
Okay. Do you work in your pajamas?
No, I work in, we have an office here at the Watergate.
You have to go to an office.
I'm kind of in a bullpen. We have offices. I'm at a desk with a computer surrounded by the rest of the hotline staff. And they're always great to have around, especially for me because I don't have time to read the Post and the Times in the morning. I'm diving right into blogs. And so I only see the world through bloggers' eyes. And so a lot of times, I will need a quick, how is the Post covering this? Where was Dodd yesterday? What did McCain actually say? And I can just shout out to people that are around me, and because they all have different beats, and I know who has those beats, and then so they can give me the quick version of it. So it's great having a bunch of people who are doing mainstream stuff right around me, so I can use them as a resource.
That's great.
Well, we're at the 48-50 minute mark, so I wanted to keep this under an hour.
And I think that's a good goal.
Okay. Well, Joan, it was absolutely wonderful, and hopefully we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Conn.
Bye.
Bye.